To give it some context, I was not wearing a very daring or revealing outfit. I had on a high-waist skirt and a crop top, but there was maybe 1 to 2 inches of my skin showing, maximum. It really was a normal outfit. I was waiting at the train station. The train was late as usual. Next to me on the bench, I see an old man reading a book that's handwritten in Russian. I actually thought that it was kind of cute. I didn't think much of it after that. We finally board the train, and the old man ends up sitting across from me. There was no one else in our little booth of 4 benches. The first 30 minutes or so go by without incident. He is reading his handwritten book, and I'm also reading a book and just playing on my phone. As we travel, the weather starts to get a bit rainy. After a while, the old man looks up and out the window. He looks at me and starts screaming and pointing out the window. At this point, I notice that he seems to be missing a part of his face around his eye. But I figured that he was old, so you don't stay in perfect shape. I am trying to understand what is happening. He is mostly screaming and not making much sense. I finally understand that he thinks I am the one who brought on the bad weather. I'm just sitting there, shocked, looking to the other passengers for help, and everyone is ignoring me. I turn to look at the man, and he is screaming that it is because of my shirt. I must have the devil inside of me because no sane person would wear a crop top, obviously. I don't even say anything at this point. He stops screaming, and he turns a few pages in his book. He pulls out 2 crosses from his pocket, one in each hand, and holds them towards me and starts performing an exorcism. Parts in what I assumed was Latin, parts in Russian and German. He's leaning towards me, crosses in hand, opening and closing his eyes, screaming throughout the exorcism. I don't even know what to do at this point. I couldn't leave the train cart that we were in. Even if I got up, he would still see me or find me since it was pretty small. I debated going to hide in the bathroom, but I still had a good 50 minutes left in the train, and I was afraid that he would wait outside the door and hurt me as I eventually tried to leave the bathroom. So I sit there. He finishes his exorcism, seems to be content with it. He keeps telling me that I need to leave the country because the churches in Germany are crap, and I needed to go to a good church in Russia for a proper blessing. I nod and sit there. He reads his book. After another 10 minutes or so, he pulls out a card and he hands it to me. I look at it. It says his name and a photo and says that the holder of this card is severely mentally disabled. I'm thinking maybe that he had escaped from some facility somewhere. I couldn't get a good look at the name of the hospital. I just anxiously wait for the train ride to end. He says that he wants to follow me to make sure that I can keep the devil out. I say no, that it isn't necessary. He says that he will find me, that Frankfurt isn't a big city, and that he can still sense the devil in me, so he's afraid his exorcism didn't work properly. The train is pulling up to the station. He says that I should wait for him, and I say no, to which he says that it doesn't matter, because he is drawn to the evil inside of me. I get up, and as soon as the doors open, I run. I ran and ran and ran. At this point, I don't even know what my destination is. I just know that it needs to be as far away as possible. Eventually, I go into a big shopping mall, and I call the friend that I was meeting, who comes to join me. I never saw the man again. About 15 years ago, when I was 22-ish, my best girl and I went out to the bars 3 to 4 nights a week, and generally met some interesting people and made a few new friends. There were a few bars that we hit up more than others, and one in particular where we knew the bartender, the manager, pretty well. We had went the week of Halloween, and each night, their staff would dress up in a different costume. This is where we came across Ron. He was bouncing at this bar, and didn't even catch my eye in the slightest, as I gave him my ID to get in. Until a few years ago, I never looked anyone in the face. I have to force myself to do it. My girl and I hung out, drank and danced and met some people, and then headed up to the bar to chat with a friend. He asked me what I thought about Ron. I had no idea who he meant, and he gestured to the bouncer, to which I was like, meh. He was older looking, very muscular. He turned out to be a major gym rat. I was at 22-ish, dressed in black and skulls and platforms. Didn't seem my type on the outside, but the bartender friend vouched for him, said he was a really cool guy. He asked if he could give Ron my number, and I figured it would be okay. I hear from him the next day and he wants to hang out. At the time, I lived with my uncle and aunt, a pastor and his wife. So he invited me to meet at his place and we would just go have a casual hang somewhere. A simple, middle-of-the-day chill. I get there and his apartment door is wide open, and his much better looking, married and closer to my age friend is there. He seems nice enough, and I didn't feel unsafe as they left the door wide open, and again, my bartender friend had vouched for him. He mentioned that he needs to grab a few office supplies, so the three of us pile into his crappy car and head to an office supply store. We go in, and as we walk in, a pretty girl walks by, and he does the head thing and completely stares at her, like the obvious follow her with his head thing. We aren't together, but I found it to be rude. So later in the car I mention it. I tell him, "Hey look, I know we're just hanging out, but don't disrespect me like that. Everyone looks, but be less obvious and don't make me look bad in public." He laughs and tells me that it's hot that I stood up for myself, especially on our first hangout. Okay, we get back to his place, and as we walk inside he says, "I like that. You're gonna have a ring on your finger by December. Remember, we met Halloween weekend." So anyway, his friend leaves. We get takeouts and we hang and drink and just talk. It turns out that he's from the same tiny town that my parents are from, which is 6 hours south of us. He is a Desert Storm veteran, which made him more than 20 years older than me, and he was back in school to finish his degree, worked full-time during the week, and bounced at night and on the weekends. Seemed decent. He asked about my tattoos. I have a lot. We talked about my love of horror and fascination with true crime and serial killers. He seems interested but says that he doesn't know much about them. So I tell him that I'll lend him my encyclopedia of serial killers, so it can be like a crash course for him. Maybe a week later we hang out again and I bring him the book. We hang multiple times and I even sleep there a few times. One day we were hanging out and day drinking heavily. He says something to me that felt very much like he was getting way too comfortable way too fast, like telling me to do something. I told him not to speak to me like that, and I turned to walk away when my head jerked back. He had grabbed me by my hair at the base of my neck. I grabbed his hand and he tried to laugh it off and apologize, saying that he didn't mean to be that rough and tried to act like it was some sort of foreplay, but I cut that off real quick. I wanted to leave, but I was already very buzzed. So I just sat there and he said that he was going to do some work. I thought that I would just let the buzz wear off, head home and never talk to this guy again. While I'm sitting and he's working, he suddenly decides to tell me in graphic detail about his favorite serial killer in the book so far and why. I think the way that he's talking about it seems off, but again, I'm just waiting out my buzz. He starts working on a homework assignment that is studying urban legends and such. He plays videos with horrible creepy content and it's creeping me out. I realized later that I felt that way because I didn't feel safe with him. I ask him to wait until I'm gone to play it out loud, or to put on headphones, and he laughs at me, tells me that he can't believe I'm such a poser. He tells me, "You have all these tattoos and skulls and really, you're scared. You look all goth and punk rock, but you're terrified." He laughs this scary laugh, and he's really enjoying that. This creeps me out. I don't want to drive, even mildly buzzed. I tell him that his reaction is really scaring me. I love scary things, but I realize this guy is enjoying watching me be really uncomfortable, and he loves it. His face gets completely serious, and he suddenly tells me that he has a machete under his mattress. I look and see the handle barely sticking out. He tells me that he can make me disappear, and nobody would ever find my body. In that moment, my adrenaline hit. I grabbed my bag and I ran to my car. He sort of slowly lumbered behind me, laughing at me and telling me not to leave. I am stone cold sober at this point. Adrenaline, I guess, and I start my car. I take off about 2 minutes down the road by the mall and just park and slow my breathing down. I call my girl and I tell her everything. For the next week, he texts and calls me over and over, switching between begging me to give him another chance, berating me, calling me a poser and a fake. I tell our bartender friend, and he can't believe that Ron did all of those things. He's only worked with him a few more times and they don't talk. Ron set his sights on someone new, another chick in her early 20s. Her family owns the Vietnamese restaurant in the same strip as the bar. The bartender tells us Ron had just started seeing her, and she ended up getting pregnant immediately. I asked the bartender to warn her or give her my number, but he never saw her again. I hope and pray that she didn't get stuck with Ron, and every time I'm in that area, I pray that I don't run into him again. He can keep the encyclopedia. I just hope that he hasn't picked up any tips from it. When I was a teenager, my parents were quite wealthy. My dad was a salesman for a high-end Chinese tech company, and he would always take trips overseas. There was one time that my mother chose to go with him. She had never been to China before, and there was some opportunity to get out of Hong Kong and experience the culture of the mainland. After a luxurious start to the vacation, my parents hopped in a plane and headed over to Shenzhen. Now, my mom is a pretty streetwise lady by US standards. She's managed to survive some pretty intense living conditions and navigate some bad parts of town well enough. So, I think she got incredibly arrogant here. At some point, when my dad was speaking with his superiors in a meeting, she asked if she could head out alone to do some shopping. My dad's boss was apprehensive and told her if she really wanted to take down his number in case anything happened. While shopping, she was lured to a back alley shop that sold a pretty diverse amount of designer knockoffs, bootleg DVD box sets, etc. I'm a huge TV fan, and apparently, she thought this would be a great opportunity to pick me up the first 5 seasons of Scrubs on DVD. It was nothing crazy. There are places like that all over China, but apparently she chose the wrong back alley shop. When she was finished making her purchase, a legitimate-looking cab rolled up and offered her a ride. The cab ride was quiet, and it didn't take my mom too long to realize that something was wrong. The man wasn't driving her back where she came from, and I think he expected her not to have remembered the way to her hotel. There was a second man in the passenger seat with a stern look. The men spoke to each other in Chinese and did not acknowledge her when she spoke to them. They just kept driving. It took her less than half a mile before she tried to escape the car, but the doors were locked from the inside. The men then began yelling at her in Chinese and threatening her. They took her purse and removed the money inside of it and began talking among themselves. With one last resort, my mom called my dad's boss, who began speaking to them in Chinese via speakerphone. The men were scared almost immediately. They stopped the car, grabbed my mom and literally threw her out of the car into the street, and then they tossed the money at her. When she got back, she learned a few things. 1. The money was counterfeit. They had kept the real money. 2. The men were a part of the Chinese mafia. According to my dad's boss, people have a tendency to go missing in situations like that all the time, particularly tourists. He said that had she not made that phone call, she would have likely ended up in a very bad situation. The fake cab scam was actually quite a common method of doing this. And 3. My dad's boss had some sort of questionable but scary pull among the criminal underground of mainland China. Or at least he knew how to put the fear of God into them. She still has no idea what he said to them. To this day, she gives me a lot of flack. Says that Scrubs box set nearly cost me my life. So, I had met a guy online. We talked for a day or two, but I was at the tail end of my degree, and things were getting to be a lot. So, I decided no dating until I was done. I let the handful of guys that seemed nice know before deleting the dating app, so they would know why I deleted it, and wouldn't think that I had ghosted because of them. He happened to be online when I sent it and said that I seemed cool, can we keep in touch? Sure, no worries, and I added him on Facebook. Maybe once a week he's like, hey, how are you? What are you up to? Just normal conversation stuff. I would chat about university, work, the gym, whatever. After maybe 2 to 3 months, he's like, hey, we've been chatting for a bit. Let's grab coffee. I'm like, yeah, sure, he seems nice enough. I reiterated it would be his friends and that was fine with him. I was about to head into exams, so we made plans for in 3 weeks' time after I had finished them. He had started messaging me more and more regularly after making plans, more than once a day, and he starts calling it a date, which people call catching up a coffee date without it meaning an actual date. But I wanted to make sure that we were still on the same page, so I just said, hey, you keep calling it a date. Just making sure that we're clear, it's just a catch-up as friends. He snapped. He was sending me all sorts of horrible things on Facebook, so I blocked him. I had given him my number so we could make plans. So he started calling and calling, leaving voicemails. It was late, so I put my phone on silent and I went to sleep. The next morning, I wake up to 37 missed calls and voicemails between 10 p.m., continuing until 4 a.m., as well as a multitude of horrible texts. Now, this was 7 years ago, when you couldn't just block someone on a phone. At first I thought if I ignored him, he would get bored. After about a week, he wasn't slowing down, with dozens of calls a day. I called my phone company to get him blocked, and they said that you can only block 3 people, are you sure? I had to jump through all the hoops and then they turned around and said that they couldn't do it. So I would have to call the police. So I called the police and they say that I have to call the phone company, but I can make a statement of harassment in case he does something more. 3 weeks later, he's still going strong, but in his text he starts saying he's going to force me to go on a date with him, and that I won't have a choice and blah blah. And then he starts saying that if I won't come to him, he'll come to me, and is telling me my schedule with where I will be at any given time, which he put together based on our weekly conversations about normal stuff, threatening to come to where I'll be. I had to stop doing my regular activities and pretty much become a hermit. He ended up making a threat to my life. I can't remember what he said word for word, but it was essentially, "Girls like you get what they deserve," or something like that. But more clearly threatening, he would be the one to make it happen. I contacted the police again, and that was enough for an RVO, and I never heard from him again. Oh, and I was 20, but his pictures looked younger, so I didn't realize online, but it turned out this guy was 34. So this wasn't dumb young kid behavior. This was a grown man. I've had many other psychos since this guy, but I'm very grateful phones have since allowed you to block anyone, anytime.